Welcome back to chapter number 8 of this lecture series with on CCNA Cybersecurity Operations with me, Joachim Kjærestad from the University of Skövde. In chapter number 8 we will start talking about defending the network. So now we've been talking a lot about attacks and security fundamentals, but now we'll try to get into the actual defense strategies. This lecture is divided into 3 parts: understanding defense, access control, and threat intelligence. And we are of course beginning with part number 1 because that's what makes sense. So let's start with some terminology. And the terms here are assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. And an asset is basically anything of value to the organization. This can be information, it can be people, it can be services, hardware, so on and so forth. A vulnerability, that is a weakness in a system or its design that can be exploited by a threat. And what is threat then? Well, that's a potential danger to an asset. So when we talk about identifying assets, this is a key part in security because keeping track of the assets is basically about finding what we have to know what we have to protect. And asset management, that would involve inventorying, keeping inventory of our different assets, and then we develop and implement policies and procedures to protect the assets as we need. So let's move on to vulnerabilities. And trying to identify threats that provides a list of possible threats for a particular environment. And to do this successfully, there is a number of questions that we have to ask. And those are: what are the possible vulnerabilities of a system, of our system? Who may want to exploit those vulnerabilities to access specific information assets? And I mean, the first one, that's quite commonly asked. What are the vulnerabilities to whatever? But the other one is equally important. Who may want to exploit those? Because that tells us much about our threat actor. And the way in which we need to defend is much different if we need to defend against a script kiddie or if we need to defend against a state-sponsored actor. We should also ask ourselves, what are the consequences if system vulnerabilities are exploited and assets are lost? So let's say that we have a small computer that holds some pictures taken on company parties. That may be sad to lose because we can't watch funky pictures of ourselves in different perhaps not too positive situations. But will the company die if it goes down? No, probably not. So maybe we won't invest 10% of the company revenue into trying to defend that server. However, if we are a manufacturing company, the production controlling server, if there is such a thing, that's a key part of our business, so we will do anything to defend it. Different organization, of course, will have different threats. If we're a car painter, we will have a different threat situation than if we are the NSA. So defense in depth, again, is an approach that we have to use to successfully protect the assets of our organization. And this basically means that we implement preventive measures at different network layers, as we talked about in the last class. This includes having protection at the network edge, inside the network, and at security endpoints. So we need firewalling, we need intrusion detection, and we need, for instance, advanced malware protection at our endpoints. I also want to introduce 2 security vegetables. I couldn't find a better title for it. One that I'm quite familiar with is the analogy of the security onion. And this is, we talk about the security onion because we arrange defense in layers around the asset, just like the onion has layers of whatever it is around the core of the onion. And the idea here, or the analogy, is that the attacker needs to penetrate every layer of the onion to get to the asset. So what we try to do is we try to build these layers of defense, so an attacker have to prevent the different layers in order to get into what's in there. But you actually use another analogy for modern networking. I don't really know how accurate it is. It's the security artichoke. And this is actually a security analogy or a view of the network that benefits the threat actor. And the idea here is that we have security measures like those leaves in the artichoke. And whenever one leaf is removed, some good stuff or even a foothold will appear to the attacker. So the analogy here is that the threat actor will only need to remove certain artichoke leaves to get to the good stuff. Okay, getting away from the food lesson, let's turn to policies. And I mean, whenever I start talking about policies, I can see how the posture of the audience goes down, and people go like, ugh. But policies are so important. Policies should be good policies, though. We can have another class on that. You can watch some video that I make up. But an organization must have policies in place that defines the standards of correct behavior and sets the baseline of acceptable use. Then, of course, we need to translate the policy into practices. That's a whole nother story, a whole nother class. But some guiding policies should include or could include company policies that basically establish the rules of conduct and employee responsibilities. So when you have to work, how you have to work, dress code, stuff like that. Then we may have employee policies that express salary rules, pay schedule, benefits, all the nice stuff that you want to know about as an employee. And then we have the security policy. And the security policy is there to identify a set of security objectives and design rules of behavior for users as well as administrators. What can we do and what do we have to do to ensure security? And of course, in addition to our own policies, there are laws out there that the organization must, of course, comply with. So let's discuss the contents of the security policy for a little while. Some things that it should at least include is identification and authentication policies. So how do we identify ourselves? How do we do authentication? Do we use passcard? Do we use password? So on and so forth. Password policies. Should we have password change? The answer is not regularly, only in need. Do we enforce password complexity, or do we follow the NIST standard that enforces passphrases? So on and so forth. Acceptable use policies. Can we, for instance, install Spotify? Can we watch Netflix? Are we allowed to input USB devices? And in that case, how? Remote access policies. How can we access the network remotely? Network maintenance. When is the network maintained? When are maintenance tests carried out, and by who and how? Incident handling policies that we will get back to later. How do we handle incidents? Where to report them? Who to activate? So on and so forth. And I just want to end with talking a little bit about bring your own device, because many organizations support bring your own device or are forced to because people bring their own devices. And those little buggers are actually large security concerns. So as such, you should have a policy in place that govern, for instance, what employees that can bring their own devices, identify what devices we support, the level of acceptance or access that an employee is granted when using personal devices, describe the rights to access and activities permitted to security personnel on the device. So for instance, you may say that, okay, you can enter your iPhone into our network, but if you do, you have to install this little monitoring application so we can see what you're doing. Identify regulations that must be adhered when using employee devices, and identify safeguards to put in place if a device is compromised. Because what we need to understand with bring your own device is that it's actually unidentified devices brought into our network that we as a company have little or no control over, so we have to try to get control. There are some best practices expressed in the material for bring your own device. So first, password protect and protect access. We should use unique password for each device and account. And this is so hard to achieve in reality, unique passwords, but we should try to find practices. One that I emphasize, I'm not sure if what I'm about to say now complies with the material, but one practice, a password practice that I found in my research is to be quite good enough, is that we build a password consisting of 4 or 5 words. Not necessarily a phrase, but something like cat, green, blue, house. So that's our password, and to make it unique, we just apply where it's, we just append another word describing where it's used. So we have our standard password, and then we append work, phone, Facebook, LinkedIn, to uniqueify the password. And it's sort of like using the idea of salting. So it's not very complex. An attacker can, if they do a dictionary attack, easily add that for sure. But if you look at the resultant password hashes, the hashes will be completely unique. And if an attacker does a dumb, for instance, gets the password from a password leak and just do a dumb dictionary attack, then it won't work, because those attacks are usually rather stupid. They just test whatever they have, so it's usually good enough. I'm quite sure that this material talks about 12 characters long, super complex stuff that no one can use, and everyone writes down instead and calls that good. Check it out and make sure you know whatever password policy that this material likes before you do your certification exam. Where were I? Well, manually control wireless connectivity. And this is turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity when not in use and only connect to trusted networks, so you know where your device is digitally. Keep it updated, backup data, and enable Find My Device. And what we want here is that users subscribe to a device locator service with remote wipe feature. So if you have a device, a cell phone with company data and it gets lost, it should be able to wipe it remotely. Provide antivirus software. Let the company just provide antivirus for bring your own devices and be done with it. And use some mobile device management software so you can actually implement security settings and software configuration on all devices that wish to connect to the company network. So that was it. I'll see you next time for part 2 of this chapter. Leave questions in the comment field if you like to.